Rabbi, when does the Shavua start?
Right now, I'm going to share some of my screen here. And we're going to look at the Sefer HaChinuch over here. This is the story about Tochacha Something Say. We'll look at the pasuk first, just because it's so fascinating. This is a different resource. Here we have the pasuk up here. Vayikra Perek Tes. Let me go ahead and mute everybody if you don't mind, so we don't get any bad feedback here. Okay, it looks. I can't really do it while I'm sharing. I'm going to go ahead and mute all of you. If you want to say something, all you have to do is press on the space bar. Okay. One second. Got to get to the right thing here. You get to see everything that I look at, huh? Okay, hold on. Stop share. I apologize. Give me 1 second here. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Oh, again, here we go. Let's see. Okay, so the pasuk says like this. It's Vayikra Perek Yud Tes pasuk Yud Zayin, chapter 19, verse 17. Lo tisna es achicha bilvavecha. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tochiach es amisecha. But rather, what should you do? You should give rebuke, give musar. My father-in-law has a story that he shares with us about a time that he was young and dumb, I guess you would say, and he says that he had a Rebbe, a European Rebbe, a Holocaust survivor, somebody who didn't speak English particularly well, and they were learning about this pasuk, or they were learning about this sugya, and he translated Hocheach tochiach amisecha as you shall tell off your people. You know that English expression, to tell someone off? To tell off somebody. And my father-in-law, on a test, instead of using the word tell off, he wrote the word rebuke. Okay? I shouldn't say my father-in-law was young and dumb in the story. You'll see in a second. My father-in-law took a test, and he had written rebuke instead of tell off, and he got it marked wrong. Okay? This is one of the family stories. He got it marked wrong. And apparently his mother was so upset that he got this point off, that she went out, got herself a dictionary, a Hebrew English dictionary, and where it showed that the word tochacha meant rebuke, and she highlighted it, and she folded down the page, and she gave it to the Rebbe. She gave it to the Rebbe to show him that her son was right. Now, apparently, her husband, my father-in-law's father, Zadie Harry, wasn't too pleased, because not only was this not really in sync, with the family, whatever, it's not something he would have done, but he also was the chairman of the board of the school, and it didn't go over so well. This is one of the family legends, okay? Tochacha. Tochacha means to rebuke. It means you see someone doing something wrong, so you should go ahead and say something. However, lo tisa lav chet, says the pasuk, which literally means don't carry on him sin. Rashi says, lo talbin et pana berabim. Don't embarrass him in public. So already here you have this idea, this neat concept. Torah says you see someone doing something wrong, you should tell him. And here you have this idea of don't embarrass him in public. One of our favorite books is called All for the Boss. It's written about Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Herman, I think was his name. Very unique individual. He was a furrier and a Talmud Chacham, a man out of his time. He came over with his family originally in the late 1800s, For some reason they left him in New York. I don't know the whole story, and he swore to himself that he would never forgo Shabbos, and he would always invite guests. And it's a remarkable book. It's a very worthwhile book, and there's a whole chapter in that book that we read this past Shabbos for the kids about how he would say things and do things that we would never do nowadays. And in terms of kiruv, it would not be effective nowadays. But just as an example, somebody came to visit him in his home, and he's sitting across from him, and he looks distracted. And finally, the guy says, and he says, "Take off your coat." He's like, "What?" He says, "Take off your coat. I need to check it for shatnez." Can you imagine having a guest over at your house and you ask him to take off his coat so you could check it for shatnez? Right? We would never do such a thing nowadays. And the gentleman who looked very bemused and confused took off his coat. And what do you think Rabbi Herman did? He took out a razor and he started slicing open the collar to check, where the shatnez usually is behind the behind the collar. And he says, "Yeah, it's shatnez. You have to get, I know a tailor. He'll remove it for you and he'll have it fixed, just as good as new." Now, we're probably thinking, like, I'm a sugar, like, who would you do that? Why would you do that to somebody? It happens to be there's a sugya and brachos about whether or not you're supposed to do that or allowed to do that. Okay, but putting that aside for the moment, putting that aside, that guy was so moved by how passionate Rabbi Herman was about this mitzvah that whenever he bought new clothing, he brought it over to get checked. So obviously it worked. Things were different back then. I don't know that nowadays you could do such a thing. Most people won't respond very positively. Okay, but principle number one when it comes to, and would he have done that in public? I don't know. But principle number one, according to Rashi and the Torah already says that if you are going to see something and you're going to say something, make sure that you're not going to embarrass him. Okay? Make sure, and that's what the end of the pasuk means. Latisa lavchet. You shouldn't carry sin. That means make sure that you don't embarrass him in the process. Okay. So there's a number of fascinating Gemaras. There are a number of fascinating Gemaras about this mitzvah that I wanted to share with you this evening. And I'll just give you as a first example. I know, Zach and Alana, you've been learning Navi lately. If you look, I'll give you an example that I just learned recently. Hopefully he includes it here. It's not included in this particular handout. No, it's not. Okay, so I'll just share it. I'll just tell you about it. But the Gemara in Shabbos speaks about. The Gemara in Shabbos speaks about. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy here. The Gemara in Shabbos speaks about Shlomo HaMelech, and the Gemara says that Minayin. How do you know that if you don't say something, then I apologize. The Gemara's premise is, I'm sorry, I'm very tired. The Gemara's premise is that if you see something and you don't say something, then you become part of that sin. Okay? If you see something and you don't say something, so then you bear at least in part that partial responsibility for that sin. And the Gemara brings a few different examples, but the one that is perhaps the most famous is the one from Shlomo HaMelech. What is this? The Gemara says, "Kol ha'omer Shlomo chata eino elo toeh." Anyone who says that Shlomo HaMelech sinned, that King Solomon sinned, is making a mistake, a grave error. Yeah, the pasuk says, the verse says that Shlomo HaMelech sinned. He got caught up in the sins of his wives. So the Gemara discusses it in depth, and there's a couple different opinions. And then the Gemara says it's because his wives were doing things that were inappropriate, having to do with different avodah zarah of Moab, and he never protested. Because he did not protest, he bore a certain degree of responsibility. Okay, that's that Gemara. The Gemara brings different examples of people in positions of leadership who had the power to change many people, and by saying something. And whether it was weakness in leadership, or maybe they just said, "Oh, they won't believe me anyways." Very, very interesting Gemaras about it, and you'll see some of them on Shavuos night. If we're going to go through all those Gemaras, we'd be here till 10 o'clock. But you'll see some of those Gemaras on Shavuos night. They're included in the handout. Okay, and we can always expand on the shir. I find this a fascinating topic. So we will look though together. Let's look at the Gemara in Erechin. The Gemara in Erechin has three different opinions over here. Gemara says like this. Minayin, I'll show you where I'm reading from. Minayin l'roa b'chavero, I'm underlining it. Minayin l'roa, I think it's red. Minayin l'roa b'chavero davar meguna. How do you know that if you see something totally inappropriate by another Jew, shechayev lehochicho, that you have to tell him something, that you have to say something? Shenemar, because it says hochiach tochiach, hochiach tochiach, you have to say something. Hochicho v'lo kibel. Let's say somebody says something and the guy that you're talking to rejects it, ignores you. How do you know? How do you know that you have to say something again? That's why it says say something, say something. That's why the Torah repeats itself in order to stress it. That then even if they keep rejecting you, you should continue to say something. I might think that you should say to the point where you're going to embarrass them. That's the Rashi that we just saw. Rashi quotes that Gemara. You're not supposed to do that. Okay, so here's the part of the Gemara that in a way is a little bit even more interesting perhaps. The Gemara says, Amar Tarfon, Tanya Amar Tarfon. There's three opinions here. We're going to look at all three. Okay? The Gemara says, Tanya Amar Tarfon. Timhani ani yish b'dar hazeh shemekabel tochacha. I wonder if nowadays you have anybody who knows how to accept Musar. Okay? If you were to say to somebody, take out, here's a metaphor, take out the toothpick from between your eyes, Amar lo, he'll say to you, tul kora mi beinenecha, take out the beam between your eyes. What's this Rashi? What's this talking about? So Rashi says, I'm going to clear this for a second here. So Rashi writes, I'll show it to you right now. Kisem, look at where my mouse is. Kisem, klamar, that means to say, avon katon shabiyadecha zeh, zeh yachalomar lo, tul'ata avon gadol shabiyadecha. If you have klamar, if I complain to somebody else about a small sin that he's doing, so the toothpick, the thorn, represents a small sin, and I tell somebody else, hey, your behavior is inappropriate, but I'm pointing out something minor. He might respond to me, you should take the avon gadol, you take the great sin. That's in your hand. That's in my hand. I can't say anything to anybody, shekul and chotim, because we're all sinners. You might think this is cynical, but basically the Gemara is saying that if you're a hypocrite, you can't talk. So you've got to be at such a level of purity that if you're going to say, if you're going to say something, you have to be totally sin-free in that particular regard. So that's Rabbi Tarfon's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Tamhani mish b'dar hazeh sheyodea lahachiach. I wonder if nowadays anybody even knows how to give tochacha. Okay? If anybody even knows how to give tochacha. Rashi says, sheyodea lahachiach. Beautiful Rashi. Some of you will really appreciate this. I know, Ilana, you and I have discussed this concept in the past when it comes to students responding to it during class. Derech kavod. To tell someone when you see them doing something wrong in a respectful way, shelo yupana mishdan, and so as not to embarrass them. Obviously, if you're going to embarrass them, you're not allowed to do that. Torah says, don't. Lo sisa lo chet. So he says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, if you can't embarrass them, I don't know that anybody actually knows how to say it in such a respectful way that you could actually say something. So according to these first two opinions, basically tochacha doesn't really exist anymore because we just don't know how to do it. And then you have a third opinion. I'll just share with you. I once heard in the name of the Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said that the only way to give tochacha is through love. I happened to ask Reb Mendel Myers, which means that the only way that you're ever willing to accept something from someone is if you know they truly care about you and love you, which makes a lot of sense, especially nowadays for us. So I asked Rabbi Mendel Myers if he has a good source for that, and he sent me a thing. He sent me a text with a picture of a sefer, of a book, and there he quotes the Baal Tanya, I believe, and I'll read it to you. Kodem tzivoy hocheach tochiach, ksiv lo sisnas achicha, which I didn't read to you, but it happens to be true that the pasuk, the verse just before, of telling something to someone, when you see something, is don't hate your brother in your heart. He says, Kizeu t'nai mukdam lehochacha. This is a condition that is required, that's a prerequisite to giving musar. And then it says, okay, all right, that's a side point. And then Rabbi Myers wrote to me, goes, how amazing is it that in the daily reading of the 26th of Iyar, the 41st day of the Omer, which was last week, the exact day that I asked him this question. So he had a source for me that day. How's that for a little smile from Hashem, a little hashgacha pratis, okay? Now, before we, let's read the next Gemara, and then I'll share the Sefer HaChinuch with you. The next Gemara is fascinating. I don't know if it's one we can necessarily relate to, but let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at the Gemara here. The Gemara tells about the famous Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says like this. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was the name of a Tana. He was a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, a little bit older than him probably. Made ani alai shemayim va'aretz. Says, I call heaven and earth to testify on my behalf. Shaharbe pa'amim, many times, laka Akiva al yadi. Akiva is a reference to Rabbi Akiva. Sha'isi kobel alav lefnei Rabban Shimon, lefnei Rabban Gamliel, I think is the right person. He says, I used to go to Rabban Gamliel and complain about Rabbi Akiva many, many times. In other words, he went to the principal and he told on him. That's kind of an indirect way of giving musar, right? That's saying something when you see something, but it's not. Obviously, it's not direct. What we don't like snitches. We don't like people that tell on us. Okay, and look at this beautiful language here. He says, "V'kol shekain shehusafti bo ahava." He says, our relationship deepened and we added love. My relationship with Rabbi Akiva got that much better. This is a quote from a pasuk in Mishlei. Al tochach leitz pen yisneka. Don't say something to a letz. A letz is a scoffer. A scoffer is like the archetype of a sinner, like you have in the first chapter of Tehillim about being in a moshav leitzim, right? Derech hatoyim, to be with people that are sinners. That's a leitz. Pen yisneka. If you say something to a sinner, he's going to hate you. But rather hocheach lechacha v'yaveka. Say something, to a wise person, and he will love you. So here you have a third opinion. And with this third opinion, you have a tochacha that is obviously something that's super effective. Okay, that's super effective. Now, and so that's very different than the first two opinions that who am I to give musar? And I don't know that I know how to give musar. Says Rabbi Yochanan, as long as your relationship is in the right place, it's not a problem. Okay? It's not a problem. I want to share a beautiful, very beautiful Sefer HaChinuch with you. And maybe we'll call it a night at that point. We'll see where everyone is holding. Sefer HaChinuch, just going to page 5 here, says like this. Okay. Sefer HaChinuch you're familiar with from past shiurim. Sefer HaChinuch, in addition to telling about the laws and the sources for the mitzvos, also gives us something called the Shrashi HaMitzvah. The Shrashi HaMitzvah are the reasons for the mitzvah, the roots of the mitzvah. So he says like this. Mishrashi HaMitzvah, from the roots of the mitzvah is, Lafi, maybe before I tell you this, let's stop for a moment, and I'll ask you, okay? We just learned about, I'm going to unmute you. If you want to mute yourself, actually I'm going to keep you muted, it's just too much feedback. But you can unmute yourself easily by raising your hand and I'll unmute you, or you can just press the space bar. So I want you to participate here a little bit, okay? If I were to ask you the general question, see something, say something. Rebuke. You see a Jew doing the wrong thing and you say something to them. Will that generally generate love or a coming together of people or a distancing of people?
I think most of the time it would be a resentment.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's probably true.
That's how you don't mind your own business.
Exactly. Right. Who are you to say something, Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's think about it though. Forget our generation for a moment. Okay, let's talk about Jews who are on the highest level possible. Do you think that if a Jew was on the highest level possible, and they were doing something wrong for whatever reason it might have been, let's assume they didn't know, okay, and you said something to them, would they be happy that you said something or upset with you?
I think they would appreciate it.
They would appreciate it, right?
But that's not a rebuke, Rabbi.
Pardon me, Jerry?
That's you couldn't call that a rebuke.
Why?
A rebuke is something almost in an attacking kind of way.
Yeah, in English, it has a negative connotation. How about in Hebrew, tochacha? I guess that also kind of has a similar connotation. But tochacha basically means see something, say something. Let's talk about the connotation. What would you say?
The question I have, Rabbi, is that if you are not a rabbi or a Talmid Chacham, how can you actually rebuke somebody for something halacha, with halacha? Are you in a position to? Do you have the right to do that?
It's a very good question. Friday night, someone knocked on my door, and apparently they left a light on. Okay, and they said to me, and it wasn't totally dark outside, but it was after sunset, no question. They said, "Do you have any small children we can borrow?" And I said, first of all, the small children are sleeping, and secondly, you can't borrow them to turn off your light. My small children don't do that. We don't do that on Shabbos, right? We don't. That's. You want to ask a non-Jew. You want to hint to a non-Jew to turn off a light. There can be room to be lenient for that kind of a thing. Not to turn on, but to turn off. And you can't say it. You can't say turn off the light. You have to hint at it. Okay, because off is different than on. But I said just and I helped them find. I pointed out some non-Jews on the block. Yeah, it is easier in Westwood. That's true. But there's 2 or 3 on the block here who are not Jewish. When we were growing up, there was a couple, Cal and Betty. I have no idea what their last name was, and their dog, whose name was Mo, I think, or Lashon. Actually, he passed away, and then she moved away. Lovely people, and for years he drove all the women to the hospital on Shabbos. For years. And then one Friday night, he was driving Rabbi Altusky to the hospital for some emergency, and he says to Rabbi Altusky, he says, Rabbi, my grandmother. Well, he says, no, stop! Don't tell me anything more. I don't want to hear the rest of the sentence. Who obviously he was. We later found out that he actually probably was halachically Jewish. Anyway, but you never would have known it. You never, there was no he didn't fit any stereotypes. Not him, not his wife, but. Yeah, sad to say. Okay, anyway, so Jerry, to go back to your question, with love, with being gentle and saying, I'm not positive about this, but I think I once learned something like that. You know me, I'm of the philosophy that you can say almost anything to anyone. It just depends how you say it.
Absolutely.
And so even when it comes to something halachic and you're not a Talmid Chacham, you're not so learning, you'd say, I once heard that, and maybe there's other opinions. But let's explore this together. Let's explore it together. Let's ask Rabbi Google. We'll let's learn the sources on it. Okay, but let's take a look now at the same.
Maybe Rabbi, the correct Hebrew word is mitaken. It's correct rather than rebuke.
Yeah, like in modern Hebrew, that's what you would say, and obviously in. I wonder if the shoresh litaken appears in Tanakh. I'd have to look that up. Interesting, okay? I have to look that up. Okay, so let's go back to the Sefer HaChinuch here. He says something very beautiful. He's not speaking about between us and Hashem. He's speaking about in the interpersonal relationship. In the interpersonal relationship, he's talking about, but I think that it extends as well to between us and Hashem. He says, Mishrashe ha-mitzvah, from the roots of the mitzvah. Lefi, he says, because sheyesh b'zeh shalom v'tova bein ha'anashim. He says, in this mitzvah, we have peace and goodness amongst all the people. When one person sins to another, and you give him some words of rebuke in private. Yitnatzeh lefanov. He'll apologize. V'yikabel hitnat fluto, and you could accept his apology. V'yishlam imo, you could become whole with him. You could become complete with him. That means you could make up with him. Now listen to this psychological insight. V'imlo yochichenu, and if you don't say something, again, this is interpersonal only. Yistemenu belibo. So what's going to happen? You're going to build up resentment. So somebody harmed you personally, okay? Somebody said something to you that embarrassed you, and instead of asking, telling them, "I'm sorry, but I really felt embarrassed when you said that to me," and then you give them a chance to apologize and you forgive them, what happens? You let it. You harbor a grudge. You let it sit right here, and you just. The resentment builds up, and the yazige love lefisha, or miyad olizman azman, and you end up having this confrontation, the unhealthy confrontation, where you end up doing or saying something that you come to regret. Like it says by those who are wicked, like Avshalom didn't speak with Amnon. Avshalom and Amnon didn't like each other. Avshalom didn't like Amnon. But rather than say something, the hatred just stewed until there was a disaster. And then he says, brings a beautiful pasuk called Darki Torah, Darki Noam and Nisivoseh Shalom. Pasuk in Mishlei, that the ways of Torah are ways of pleasantness, and its paths are paths of peace. So too when it comes to the mitzvah of Tochacha, it's meant to generate pleasantness and peace. That's the whole purpose of it. And it's amazing because, I asked you, build resentment. Obviously, it has to be done in a very gentle, very loving, a kind sort of way. And it's interesting because even for us if somebody were to harm you personally and you were to say something, obviously you have to, we all know people who are afraid of confrontation. But as a result of being afraid of confrontation, the relationship is not healthy. As opposed to people who are willing to work through the difficulty, and as a result, the relationship becomes even stronger. Speaking about the tone, I'll share one more source with you that also is not in this handout. By the way, I immediately on receiving this, I reached out to Rabbi Jonathan Muscat, who's the rabbi of Oceanside, which is somewhere near the Five Towns in New York. And I thanked him and I expressed my appreciation to him. I said, this is exactly what I've been working on. So thank you for doing such a beautiful job. He's dealing more with the conflict with, that I began with, which is Tov Sheyu Shogin V'al Yemei Vidin. Sometimes you're not supposed to say something. Sometimes you are. So how do you resolve that conflict? I was more interested in the psychological or social elements of it, which he doesn't get into. And I asked him, why didn't you bring this? Why did you bring this source or that source? And he says, look, the list is endless. You have to cap it somewhere. The article was long enough. And of course, he's right about that. But I'll share one more source with you that is something that we say on Friday nights, but I'll give you the prelude to it, which is a Rambam. Let me just go to my notes for a moment here, and I'll share with you in a moment here. Anybody have any comments or questions? You're more than happy to take them.
Yeah, Rabbi, I have one question. Does the Gemara actually talk about what you've just mentioned? That it's like, how you bring out the rebuke, whether you do it with respect and in a gentle kind of way. Does the Gemara actually talk about different ways of that, or is it just left as one thing?
Thank you so much for that segue. It's exactly what I'm going to get into right now. Okay. So take a look at this. This is a worksheet the one that I started to work on using Sefaria. If you're familiar with Sefaria, that's an amazing tool. And so this I have to get down to the bottom of it, which is where the source I'm looking for is. If anybody wants to see this particular source that has a little bit more than his sources, I'm more than happy to share it with you. Okay. Some are the ones that we already read. Take a look here at the Rambam. So the Rambam writes in Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Deos, the laws of Hilchos Deos, basically the laws of Midos. Okay. So he says first he brings the concept of Tochacha. And he hints at the idea that it's he'll read it to you. Haro chaver shechata, o sheholach b'derech lo tova. somebody who sees that his friend has sinned or is going in a way that's not good. Mitzvah lachzir lemutav, the mitzvah to bring him back to the right path. Lohodio, to let him know that he's harming himself. Now, this is the Rambam writing. One who gives muster to his friend, whether it's interpersonal, which we just discussed in the Sefer HaChinuch, whether it's between him and Hashem. Number one, it's got to be private. Number two, yidaber lo benachas, speak in a pleasant way. B'lashon raka, in a soft, literally means a soft tongue. What does that mean? It means speak to him calmly, using soft language. V'yodio, let him know. She'enu omer lo ela l'tovaso. You're only telling it to him for his own benefit. L'havio l'chayolam haba, right? To bring him to olam haba, to make sure to give him access to the great rewards from Hashem. There's a Mishnah that we say there that we say on Friday night. Does anybody have any idea where I'm going with this? The mitzvah that we say on Friday night, which I have here.
It's from the Bameh Madlikin.
Very good. What's the connection? It's up on the board. The Mishnah is in Bameh Madlikin, like Joel said, very good. Where it says 3 things a person has to say in his home, Erev Shabbos im chashecha, which means before it gets dark. Isartem, did you take meiser? If you live in Eretz Yisrael, you have to make sure the fruits and vegetables are edible for Shabbos, that it was tithed properly. Eravtem, did you put up an eruv to make sure that the courtyard so the kids could go out and play? Haliku es haner, are you ready to light Shabbos candles? Stuff. Okay, that's the Mishnah. It says the Gemara. Okay. Amar Rabba Amar Avuna. Avagav Amar Rabbanan Shlosh Dvarim Tzarchan Lomar. Even though Rabbi Huna says, even though a person, the Rabbanan said that you should do these 3 things, you have to say them calmly. Why? In order so that people will be able to take it, so that people will be able to hear it. Amar Ravashi, Ravashi says, I never heard Rabbi Huna said that as a halacha, but I did that on my own, just using logic, because it makes sense. What is this Gemara teaching? Gemara is teaching very simply. You have to be so careful how you say something. Just one more source, and then we'll end for tonight. How far does it extend? You might think maybe it only applies to a mitzvah min Torah, right? But there's a very famous Gemara with Chana. The Gemara is in Brachos. Everyone knows the story of Chana and Eli. Chana, much of the laws of davening are learned from Chana. Chana was besides herself with pain and difficulty because she didn't have children, and her co-wife, you know how you say co-wife in Hebrew? Sarah, right? The difficulty. It's Sarah, they're called Saras. 2 co-wives are called Saras to each other. That's the language in the Mishnah in Yevamos. So the co-wife, quote unquote, Penina, would give her a hard time trying to inspire her to daven. So she went to Mishkan Shiloh, she went to the Mishkan and she starts davening, but she's davening quietly. And Eli says to her, you look like you're drunk. Right? That's a very meaty story, a very good limud, very, very worthwhile to learn. Hopefully we'll have a chance to do it together in the future. And maybe after Shavuos we'll do a Tanakh series. That'll be fun. Okay, that'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so Eli says to Chana, what are you doing? Now I ask you this. Rabbi Kiveger points this out, and Tosfos makes a mention of it on the page. Davening while you're drunk, would you say that's a Torah law or a rabbinic law? It's clearly not a Torah law. There's no discussion about it in the Torah itself. It's a rabbinic law. And yet Tosfos says, you see that he said something to her. Now, he was wrong. She wasn't drunk. But he held, according to what he thought, he did the right thing. Meaning, since he thought that she was drunk, therefore he saw something, he said something. So meaning, even on a Rabbanan, this halacha applies. I don't know about you, but I find the sugya fascinating, and some of the Gemaras that you'll learn in Mitzvah Hashem Shavuos night, they go into detail. It's a gadata really about different people who didn't say something, they should have said something, and conversation between Hashem and the ministering angel of justice. Just fascinating Gemaras about this, which you'll have a chance to learn on Shavuos night. I thank everybody for joining us this evening. and hopefully you got a taste for what's to come. And really, your takeaway could be that any one of the sugyas, of those 10 sugyas, of those 10 areas of study that you're going to look at in Mitzvah Hashem, and again, I want everybody in the shul should have one of these packages. Okay, so make sure that you're signed up. And if you're not, make sure you do sign up for it. So every single person, every single one of those sugyas is really, there's a lot there, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's no way to give you everything in all at once. But even so, it should be enjoyable. To answer a couple of questions, if you rebuke someone and it turns out you were wrong, right? That's kind of connected a little bit to Jerry's question. To rebuke somebody with absolute degree of certitude, it's very difficult to do that. I've made mistakes. People have asked me questions, and I've made mistakes in our shul because I just simply gave them the information that I had access to in the moment, and then later I found out that there were other opinions, and I could have been more lenient. There's no question, no question about it. So you apologize and you learn from your mistakes. Like anything else. Myrna, thank you for that comment. Just to give you a sense of what it looks like, somebody's asking if the packages are in English. Earlier, I did show you what the package looks like. Take a look at this. So here you've got Hebrew, English, you have questions to consider, you have summaries. They did a beautiful job, okay? So, and you don't need to know Hebrew to access this package, okay? So again, I encourage everybody to participate. I don't know if everybody here has already sponsored the basket. You're welcome to sponsor it in honor of anyone or anything. Shane and I did sponsor. It's a $100 sponsorship. I've spent much more than that on the cheesecakes already. I will not be asking for a reimbursement. And it's a very, very exciting way for people. We may not be together, but we'll be learning the same thing, and that certainly has value in and of itself. Okay.
So, Rabbi, we pick them up Wednesday between 11:30 and 1:30. Is that right?
Yeah, we might change it to just an hour instead of 2 hours.
All right. So, but on Wednesday.
On Wednesday. No, not Wednesday. Thursday.
Thursday, right?
Thursday.
Yeah, I wrote Jessica that